Again, everybody, and thank you for joining us again today. Our next panel is Building Communication and Outreach Strategies, Campaigns, and Interventions to Connect Students with Resources. I'd just like to take a moment to announce that the shuttle, if you came on the shuttle, we will have one leaving at 1:30 and one at 3:30 to go back to the Sheraton in Silver Spring. So if you came on that shuttle, feel free to grab it on the way back out. And I'd like to introduce Scott Timms, Assistant Vice President, Division of Student Affairs, Campus Health from Tulane University, our moderator for this panel.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. Excited to be here with you, and welcome to our panel discussion titled Building Communication and Outreach Strategies, Campaigns, and Interventions to Connect Students with Resources. Again, my name is Dr. Scott Timms. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Campus Health at Tulane University. This morning, I'll be moderating the discussion with our esteemed colleagues, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and share with you their titles.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Malika Roman Isler, and I have the privilege of serving as the Director of Wellbeing at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Good morning. My name is Dr. John Cicchetti. I'm the Assistant Director of Student Support and Community Outreach in the Student Support and Advocacy Center at George Mason University.
Good morning. My name is Doni Russell, and I am the operating principal of Partnerships by Design, and I am also the Director of Outreach and Leadership Development at the University of the District of Columbia.
And good morning. My name is Jackie Knight-Wilt. I am the Assistant Director for Healthy Carolina Initiatives at the University of South Carolina in Columbia.
Panelists, thank you for joining us this morning. Today we're going to discuss what resources are typically available to our students and how campuses can make these resources and initiatives known to their students, and how we can encourage student utilization and engagement. I think that's one of the largest struggles that any of us in college health have these days. The goal of our panel is to have the most robust discussion possible, so please don't feel limited to a question and answer format. You'll be able to submit your questions electronically, and those directions were supplied earlier. So our first question for our panelists are, the summit today has talked a lot about how campuses can assist their students with their basic needs and well-being. What resources exist that might help students in these areas? And if you could also talk a lot about lesser known or considered resources.
I'm happy to start. This is Malika Roman Isler from Wake Forest University again. One of the things that comes to mind for me when I was reflecting on this question is not so much around a specific resource, but really the structures that allow students to access resources. Because a lot of times we, create more programs, create more services, but students often have a hard time connecting with those, not just because there's a lack of awareness, but because there isn't a sense of trust in accessing those services and a sense of connection to the structure that is providing those. One of the things that we've been able to leverage, in particular with our first year students, is faculty fellows who spend a lot of time in the residence hall. So connecting with students in the places where they live, work, and play, as we say in public health, and building those trusted relationships in smaller, more intimate communities, both with a representative of the institution and other students, because we know that word of mouth is also one of the greatest ways that students find out about the resources that they need to access. But building those smaller communities where students feel a sense of connection, a sense of identity, and a sense of trust in receiving information about the resources that they need to access. They won't always remember the myriad of resources that we shoot at them during an orientation experience. So it's like information overload, but they will remember the people that they connected with and that they felt a meaningful interaction with, to go back to that person and say, you may have mentioned something about this, or I have this particular need, where can I access that? And so leveraging the relationship outside of the classroom experience with faculty who are aware of the resources that we have has been really beneficial for us in terms of creating access to resources and creating a space where students feel comfortable accessing and connecting back with a knowledgeable member of the community to get resources.
I would actually like to piggyback on that and take it a step further. I feel like our students, they don't live in the environments we so much create for them on campus. They really live in the environments that are on social media and the environments that are on their phone. And so therefore, our definition of outreach and what we provide for them, at the university and also with Partnerships by Design, we've decided you've kind of had to go to change outreach into a marketing strategy. And it's not so much of necessarily what we want them to know, but we also need to understand what they want to know as far as resources. And resources are not only provided within our institution, they're provided outside the institution. So it's a mirage, it's also a correlation of providing the information they want, providing the information we might want to give them, and also the messaging it sends with it. But then one of the barriers that comes with that is, do they know what to do with it once they have it? And so that's the part with that. So just not inside of it, but outside of the institution as well. Yeah.
I would agree with that point. Whether you're a private or public institution, I'm sure on some level, your institution has its limitations on what it can do for students, what it can provide for students. So communicating with students and with those external resources about ways that they can get involved and ways that they can help. We've contacted numerous external resources in Northern Virginia who are more than willing to work with our students to help them meet the needs that we can't. So we're trying to educate students that even though you might not be a local county resident, even though you may be an out-of-state student, these organizations are still open to helping you and meeting with you and trying to assist us in meeting their basic needs.
When I was thinking about this question, I really went beyond resources and started thinking about really the frameworks and the philosophy that we put into campus structures for supporting well-being. And with our campus, I really thought about that we've been able to take this shared vision of a healthy campus environment in which to live, learn, work, and play, and ultimately thrive. And by making it that so, it's a vision of equitable access to well-being, which gets at your basic needs as well. And with having that shared vision, it's much easier to garner buy-in from across campus. There is a way that every single department, academia, student affairs, facilities, everyone can buy into that. And so what are we doing, the different resources that fall within those departments, by structuring that philosophy that everyone contributes to it? Because we're talking about dimensions of wellness, all 8 of them, financial and student health services, we can't take that on ourselves. So it's got to be the entire campus bought into it and the community as well, and sharing that philosophy. When I started thinking more specifically about resources, again, even our kind of patient philosophy that we have within our health center is the patient-centered medical home. And it's such a perfect practice for college health centers because a lot of us fall within the realm of student affairs. And so we're already naturally looking at how does health and well-being connect with success in the classroom, with retention, with graduation, with employability, and that language speaks to our administration, and so they can buy into it further. And by getting everyone to the table and partnering, our patient-centered medical home extends beyond our actual physical structure of the health center, because we're able to do soft referrals for financial assistance or a food pantry on campus for basic needs, getting connected to community resources for transition housing. And just adopting that philosophy really helps naturally put the resources into place that are needed to address these needs.
I will say I totally agree, and that's where I was going with that when I mentioned how they tell us what they need versus how we read what we want them to hear or what resources we want to give them. When you bring about food insecurity and you talk about food pantries, we've had surveys conducted from, Wisconsin Hope Lab, from universities, and 46% of students are food insecure. You have almost 17.5 million students in Title IV schools. So that tells us roughly 5 million students are insecure. You have 5,000 schools almost. That means that, 400, with maybe 400 pantries? That means there's a lot of students out here who are missing a resource. And if that is the case, they are telling us what they need. It's just in a different way than we're used to. And so how we respond to it, what our definition of outreach is, how we respond in marketing terms or how we send our message does have to begin to change and shift. And we have to read information differently. And so I totally agree with the theory, the background of the theory that we have to start to put in place with it. Absolutely.
So could you talk a little bit about what challenges exist about getting the word out to students about resources that are available?
Well, I start with the first thing, back to what I said before. Once you even give it to them, do they know what to do with it? I find that being myself in the cusp of being a millennial generation, the Gen X, they get the resources, like, then what? I'm not necessarily sure what to do with the resource. How do I contact this person? What do I do with this form? So it's a method of walking through the process of utilizing it as well. And so I think that there's a learning curve sometimes, regardless of your socioeconomic background, regardless of your where you grew up in the sector of the United States. There's this learning curve that comes with it.
I agree with Doni too, that getting our resources out there, we have got to be on cutting edge of marketing. I mean, our marketing directors and our health centers, they've got a whole other ballgame right now. If you've looked at the research on Generation Z college students, which is, our traditional college students we talk about, that younger age group that's coming in, they have an 8-second filter. If you don't grasp their attention in 8 seconds, if you don't excite them, they're not going to pay attention to our information. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, they're not going to pay attention until it's an emergency and they need us right away. So a lot of times, unfortunately, the prevention resources that we put in place get forgotten, but we have to market them in a way that are appealing to our students to understand it's better for self-care. And we talked about this in yesterday's track as well. And even as practitioners, I would say personally, it's hard for us to even prioritize our own self-care at times. And now we're talking to students who have much more competitive environments in school than when we were even there, because now they're having to they have all their class requirements, they're having to do competitive internships, they're having to do leadership with distinction so that they can be competitive for employment and for applying for grad schools and professional schools as well. How it's become such a challenge to grab onto them. But again, and then that's just the typical student. Then we have all the students we've talked about here today, and yesterday, about our non-traditional, our students who are food insecure, who are first generation, navigating college for the first time ever on their own. There's parenting students out there who are balancing full-time jobs in addition to being a student. So you still have to rely on those methods of communication that work with those audiences well, as balancing all the social media, the Snapchat and everything to make it appealing.
I would say it kind of, I don't want to dominate, but I would say it goes both ways. It doesn't matter if you're traditional or non-traditional, because honestly, the students who have food, even if you have food, if you're eating hot Cheetos every day and hamburgers, you're still not food secure. You're still not maximizing your potential academically. And again, the Generation Z, they're still not at the level, I would say, at the millennials, your baby boomers, when it comes to the grit level, the tenacity level of problem solving, of understanding your common issues and dealing day to day and navigating. And so I think that there's different levels of that. And so I think you're right. It has the problem, the focus span part of it is transcends no matter what. But so yeah, that it goes along with it definitely. We have to find a way. I use personally Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook myself.
One of the things that comes to mind for me is even a step, and I agree with everything that you all have described, but taking a step prior to how they use and interface with the services is how they even know about the services. And I think social media is a big part of that, but also when I think about, I know one of the traps that we fall into on our campus, and I see on many campuses, is everyone creating their own stream of information. And in some ways, it's like that again is information overload. I have my listserv, you have your listserv, you have your flyers, she has her flyers. And the students are there isn't one centralized place for them to access information. And one of the things, access information and or resources, one of the things that I think that as we think more holistically and broadly and from a public health lens about all the range of services and needs that students have, have is borrowing one of the things that I think works really well in some medical models when we think about wraparound services. If students can get more, once they know about it, if they can get more of what they need in one place, then they're more likely to access that. We know that it works in healthcare. It can also work in the range of services that we provide on a college setting that supports students, particularly in the co-curricular experience. So whether we have a lot more campuses that are moving to either co-located models, whether the services are actually integrated or not is a different conversation. But if I need access to food support, I have to go to one place. If I need my mental health care, I got to go to another place. If I need, questions about my housing, I go to another place. And so what are the opportunities, I think, when we think about access for our students and faculty and staff and the ways that we support them as well, what are the centralized hubs or the places that really serve as the linchpin for the range of things that our students need? And so there's the awareness of it, but also making access a little bit easier, both in the physical setup of our campuses, the integration of our services, and also our awareness and communication in a way that doesn't send multiple lines that they just end up deleting all of that.
That's actually, and I totally agree with one of the theories behind at Partnerships by Design, because there's so many things that we need in those wraparound services. It's not feasible for an institution to be able to provide all of that without going outside the institution walls and partnering with entities and nonprofits and cities and communities, and to bringing it all into the institution, into one hub. And I think that's usually why you do not see it more often, is because the magnitude of what it takes to bring it together. But although that's exactly the solution to the problem, though.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
Right.
I will say one effective strategy that we've had on our campus that really started several years ago is there's actually a Sunday night student email that goes out to all undergraduates, and different departments submit what events, what services and resources to highlight, and that newsletter actually does have about a 30% open rate. So it's reaching close to 8,000 of our students, and we've talked about the peer-to-peer voice is so impactful. So if we can reach 8,000, what is the multiplication rule of that when they're talking to their friends about, let's go to such and such resource, or I see you're struggling with being able to sign up for your classes, let's go talk to the Student Success Center. That's just really impactful. And how do we, within Division of Student Affairs, we have so many silos. That's just been one effective strategy of pulling us all together into one place for resources for students.
And I think also when we think about the idea, even when we say peer-to-peer voice, that's not necessarily voice-to-voice anymore. Students sit in the room and don't speak to each other literally and text and send chats and snaps and Instagram without even speaking. And so a lot of times your visual content is sending the voice message of this peer-to-peer message we speak about often. So again, that's why I say so much focus for me and for us, and a lot of the programming we do is focused on how we send it in a marketing mindset, more so than an outreach, prior than how traditional education institutions used to think of traditional outreach. Because that peer-to-peer voice, the implementation of it has changed. So. Yeah.
I agree with that, because we became much more stylized, because that's, if you're looking at the Instagram accounts, those are what the students are liking. They're liking the stylized blog, and Generation Z is wanting to see everyday people and how they're living. And that's the best way to promote projects, any kind of product endorsement even. And so when we made that transition to a really stylized look on our Instagram, we went from about 150 or 330 followers to 850, just from our student population following what we have going on. And it's because it's appealing to them, and that's what they're sending back and forth to one another. Like you said,
like a screenshot.
They're sitting in rooms, yes, and just sharing it back and forth.
So, absolutely. I mean, I do it myself for people, so it makes sense.
Yeah. I think it can't be underrated, the value of our marketing and communication and having people connect with that. I'm also still a really big fan of InPerson Connection.
Absolutely.
as well, and the opportunities to disrupt the normal flow. I think one of the creative things about outreach is getting into spaces and places that you can't be missed. So, I mean, we spend a lot of time, our campus, thankfully, is, very intimate. It's a walkable campus. We're not a huge institution, but we have two primary quads that, to get to class, students have to walk across those quads. And there are often things when we are doing various outreach campaigns or trying to share information about services or connect people with resources, doing programs that we set up on the sidewalk, on those quads. So you literally cannot get to class, you cannot get to the cafeteria, you cannot get to some of the places that students are already going without interacting with us. And so a part of that natural disruption of their flow, if you're walking like this, you're going to run into us if you're looking at your phone. So I think it's also about getting in the places that they're already using and disrupting their flow, is to make them aware of the opportunities that are available. And we find that to be really helpful, and have seen increases in our percentage of engagement when we use strategies like that, of being physically present in the places that they need to pass through during the times where they can't miss us. Some of it, I think, often we think about any kind of service or care, that there is often the perspective of people need to come to us to receive it, but a lot of times we have to go to where they are to make it accessible or disrupt the spaces that they're passing through.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree. I think that's one of the reasons that our food pantries have been really successful, and especially the one at UDC, at University District of Columbia, often seen bringing greens and produce through the campus, meaning that we have rooftop farm, meaning that we have farms in other locations, and it brings notoriety to it. Also, bringing students to the actual physical pantry itself. All the social media and marketing in the world, that's the purpose of it, is to get them in person, and to get them to interact with each other, to get them to talk, to get them to share recipes, to have them to do the experiential learning. I'm a huge fan of, learning online, of mixed learning, non-traditional learning, but the experiential part of it and bringing students together, the impactful, that's the purpose and the goal of using all of the marketing and resources anyway. So.
I think it's important that we utilize social media and, events around campus to reach different populations, but one thing that I have made an effort myself to be mindful of is to make sure that our people are informed, and not just the students, but to make sure faculty and staff are informed, because they may want to include some of these resources on their syllabi or talk about it at the beginning of the semester, but they're also the people that many times are going to receive the email or have the tears after class that say, I can't write this paper because I don't know where my next meal is coming from. And if those faculty, staff members don't realize that the university, the college has these resources, then they're going to say, I feel for you, I'm sorry, but, what can I do? What can I tell you? But if they know they exist, and, you'd be surprised how many faculty and staff are not aware. Whether they're so inundated with research, or maybe they're adjunct or contingent faculty and they come to campus, they teach, and they leave. So trying to, I think it's our responsibility as practitioners to make sure that our own people know what's out there, our faculty and staff.
Agreed, for sure, definitely.
I think it's also worth naming when we think about challenges to outreach, is that we do outreach for different purposes. Like for some, it is around creating awareness. Like, let me get out there and let you know about these things that are available, but you still have to go somewhere else to access it. Some of our outreach is programmatic in nature, where we actually want you to interface with a particular program or access a resource directly. And so I think it's worth naming that there are different strategies and levels of investment that go into the exchange that you expect to happen with the end user, whether it's a student or it's a faculty member or a staff member. And that raises for me one of the challenges that I see, particularly with some of our my partners who are more clinical in nature, who want to do outreach. The real limits in bandwidth, I'll name, in terms of the balance between doing effective outreach, being present outside of the clinical space, but also balancing clinical loads. And I'll say that in particular I'll say as an example, partners who are in a university counseling center or within a student health service, and we're all embracing or co-owning this idea of well-being, and that we all have a role to connect with the campus community, but we all have very different experiences, sets of expertise, and bandwidth based upon the other demands on our time and our respective departments. And so I think that is worth naming at least for our campus, and I think for also other colleagues that I've talked with at other campuses, that there is the constant trying to find the sweet spot for that in terms of where our clinical partners engage in the outreach efforts, but also, and can be fully present to make those work well, but also need to balance the clinical expectations if they don't have a position within their department that is fully devoted to that type of work. Because it takes a lot of time. That's community engagement. It takes a lot of time to connect with a community, whether it's a community of students or it's your local town community. That takes time and relationship building that isn't always built into someone's positional demands.
I think that's what Jackie was speaking to, though, about the theory of the university and how, we institutionalize the, the ideology behind well-being, and how we institutionalize the ideology of helping students and becoming truly student-centered and student-focused, because it does take the institutionalization of it and dedicated outsourced and outreaching, because again, not one institution is going to be able to do it alone. You're going to have to be able to outsource some things and decide where those strategic outsourcings lie and decide where you want to put those resources. And that has to be a decision that's made and then followed up on. And I think that that's a hard decision to make.
Yeah.
And so I think we're leaning towards that, but the more that our students are suffering and or as they are going into not necessarily maybe suffering or having harder times, it's going to become more prevalent. And institutions are going to have to make that decision at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you. So with this discussion, could any of you comment about or share with how you measure student awareness and usage rates? Is it worth tracking, understanding, given our limited time and resources around so many different health issues? But what's worked for you all? Where are you with this endeavor?
I love data so much.
Yes.
This is an exciting topic. I also, in my role, I also help, I oversee all of our grant pursuits and management on the student health service side. So I love being able to speak the language of a funder. And Mary talked about it yesterday in one of the sessions about being able to speak the language of administrators is so important. And how do we speak that language to presidents, board of trustees, vice presidents? We think about business, and business looks at numbers and impact, and that's how decisions are made. And so collecting our usage rates and then also even market saturation. When we do a large health education communication campaign over the span of a semester, use any resource you have. We love the NACHA custom questions. We basically have our whole department kind of go up to fist about which questions get prioritized for the 10 custom questions, but it's because they're so critical to be able to measure what we're doing. And by doing that, we were able to see 80% of our students that took our NACHA assessment had actually been exposed to our Mental Health Matters campaign via some way across the span of a semester, and that is amazing. 80%. And so again, the only way that we can make a case when states are cutting, I'm from South Carolina, when states are cutting money that goes to education, this presenting the data in the business case, that's how we're going to sustain our existence and the reason we have to be here and around. So we have to be collecting that information.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Oh, no, we collect data. I collect that in multiple forms, depending on what the program is, different levels, what I might need, what kind of grant funders, whether it be from Google Docs, asynchronous learning tools like Blackboard. And like I said, it depends on if we're working on leadership development, if we're looking at pantry usage. It just depends. Like I said, if you're also looking at requests, whether it be emails, it could be also footprint tracks on the Instagram, on the Facebook pages as well, to see who's looking at what, how often they're looking at it, and how to see they're utilizing the information. So yeah, definitely data is what you need. Also, when creating a few statistical things like a child calculator we use to see how much food insecurity is going on at university or in specific locations. We have multiple locations as well. So that alone allows us to create data that is out here for us to use so that we can go back to our grant, our funders, our executive board, our board of directors, and let them know specifically live what's going on. Because I think that live data part is really big now too. People want that static data. They want what's going on right now.
The point that I'm going to make now, I believe was mentioned in the previous session on some level. The hard quantitative data is going to get your foot in the door. That brief is going to get, to the president's office or, the vice president's office. But what I also think is really important, once you help people understand the numbers, to have some kind of quote or some kind of case brief or story from an actual student's experience, that's going to hit the heart, right? The numbers are going to hit their mind. And if you're looking for donations or increased support, if you're talking to someone or if you're providing data to someone with the 30,000-foot view, they're going to want the numbers. But when you can humanize the situation, that's when potentially you're going to get those resources allocated, or you're going to get a donor who says, that story compelled me to give to this cause. So I think we need to be mindful of the power of both quantitative and qualitative data when it relates to food insecurity and homelessness.
Yeah. I would definitely agree with everything that my fellow panelists have shared. And I would say as well, we use a lot of different strategies to look at service utilization and access, whether it's scanning in for with our one card system, scanning into programs or service locations, or using the additional questions on NACHA that has been very helpful for us in looking at reach. But I would offer that awareness and usage rates are really only the beginning of understanding what access looks like and the experience of that on our campuses. And it doesn't allow us, it's helpful, and we need to go a step further to understand not only how many points of access were made, but who's accessing services, who's not accessing services, and what is the experience of them being able to do that. And whether it's qualitatively or it's other follow-up surveys, part of what we need to know is not just that the service is there and being used, but what is the experience of that use, and is it effective? Oftentimes we measure, at the point of the experience, and even I think about like our workshops, things that are intended to be developmental, did you learn something? What are your attitudes? What are your intentions? I'm also really interested in, beyond your usage or your access, how did it change your quality of life or your quality of experience in the classroom or outside? How did it change your particular set of risk behaviors? So I think the awareness and the usage are the entree into what we need to know, and is one part of that story. But we also need the opportunity to follow up to know the value that adds. How does that make a difference for the student engagement experience, for their ability to thrive in the classroom and beyond? And that awareness and usage starts the conversation, but there's a need to go further to look at the impact of that.
That's exactly why I like using the asynchronous tools and using Blackboard, because it allows you to do that follow-up without being with them face-to-face and being in the classroom, and to use their mobile devices to see how they apply the content that they say they've learned, that they say that they have now digested. And so, okay, well, if snap a picture of this and show back to me if that's the case, or let me sit back in Blackboard Collaborative and review look at your discussion that you have with your group and see if you all really did digest that content from 2 weeks ago. So, and that's why I say I really like maximizing the tools and using it with data, because it's your best friend if you're a little nerd like me and you and Jackie.
To complement that too, more from like the clinical side, when we're talking about health and wellness, I would encourage people to take advantage of their EMRs, their electronic medical records, because there's really so much that we can do within that. We can, I just recently had a discussion with one of our grantors of, is there potential for us to pull any female student who had a long-acting reversible contraceptive inserted via the funding that we have available, and then how has that impacted her ability to focus on classes and her academics and thrive then? And if they're getting ready to graduate, were they able to find jobs? And again, looking at that impact, because that's what really is going to speak to others is long-term, how is it contributing to, again, business-minded of our administration, is it keeping students in the seats to retain them, to graduate them, and to have employability afterwards, which if they're employed, most likely they may donate back to their institution that they cared about. And the dollar bill, like if you can put all that together in such a perfect package, it's so influential.
I feel like we can with the data that we have. I mean, just think about, in our own institutions, I would love to see some of the data platforms we have, whether it be Campus, whether it be Banner, whether it be some of the Lucian models we have, start to collect the variables which you can customize to for some of that information, which tells us if students are going to be retained. It tells us their progression data, but we're not putting in there if you're head of household. We're not putting in there if you've had food insecurity in the past 30 days to a year. We're not putting in there if you've had a severe medical issue in the past year and a half. We're not putting these things in which would detrimentally cause you not to persist in school, not to graduate, and harm our graduation rates. But yet again, we're not adding and creating these risk variables in our data collection methods. Why is that if we know that? So,
My opinion, from experience, going back to the question here, talks about awareness and usage and assessing that. I personally feel that assessing usage is the easy part, right? If you have a captive audience that are using your resources, well, tell us your thoughts. What was your experience like? I think we need to dedicate more attention to awareness because speaking from my institution's perspective, we have 37,000 plus students, okay? I know there's more students out there experiencing food insecurity and homelessness than are using our resources. Mm-hmm. But how do I know if they're aware that we have these resources? And if you talk about survey fatigue, they're receiving so many institutional-wide surveys, and maybe at best we could get one question on that survey at the beginning of the year that talks about food insecurity, homelessness. I think we need to be more creative, thinking about ways to raise the awareness outside of the traditional university-wide assessment techniques.
Yeah. I find one of the things, I'll just reiterate a point that I think we've all shared is kind of not only increasing awareness and service access, but then also communicating with institutional leaders to continue to make the investments in our data collection and the provision of services and appropriate staffing. And a part of that story is the access, the awareness, but then the so what. So once people, we're constantly having to tell the so what of our stories. So not only that X number of students engaged in this service, but this is the difference that it made in the bottom line, that at the top levels of our institution, there's the deepest investment. So if it's retention, if it's GPA, whatever your institution has decided is that measure of success, whether it's alumni giving, all of those kinds of things that are really important from an organizational or institutional perspective, how does what we do on a day-to-day basis, not only how many people access it, but we have to be able to figure out ways to put our data together to tell the so what of the story. This is the value that it added to that student experience. This is the way that it feeds back into the institution. And I think that is a part of what helps us to remain sustainable as well.
absolutely.
Thank you. So I think one of the themes that I've heard come out of your various answers has been about partnerships. So could you all talk a little bit about the value of partnering with both our on-campus and off-campus partners, and how they can help both communicate about the resources and services available or also supplement what you might be doing?
I'm happy to start. I'll say first that our department is just about 4 years old on our campus, so we've not been in existence a very long time, though the work of Wellbeing is not new to the campus. We had lots of that work was burgeoning and happening in lots of places. We now just have one centralized hub that kind of organizes and spearheads and leads some of that work. But one of the things that has been very clear and apparent to me, and I'm sure it is for you all as well, is that every department has its own set of social capital. It has its own captive audience. And one of the things that being a fairly young department on our campus that has been really clear to me is that we not only do we have to leverage partnerships for our programs and work to be effective because the wisdom is in the room. We all bring different perspectives and sets of expertise to make the work even better, but also in terms of making that connection for access, that there are students, there are faculty, there are staff that may never interact directly with my team, but through our partnerships with an office where they feel a sense of connection, a sense of belongingness, a sense of shared identity, that they get access to what we have to offer through their connections with that space. And so we are pretty intentional about, and that's actually one of our measures of success, not only as a centralizing hub, not only do we offer programs and services, but part of one of the things that we reflect on is how many partnerships and what types of partnerships have we had over the course of this academic year. If we're doing our work in a silo, or we're the only ones partnering on or sponsoring a service or an event, then we are not effectively leveraging the campus community. We're not connecting, we're missing opportunities to connect with students who might need closer access to what we have to offer. And so for me, the benefit of partnering is some of that social capital, that credibility, that visibility that we can't leverage by ourselves, but we need to be able to do that in partnership with other departments.
I think that I totally agree with that, and the idea about how your department and your division is new and young. Most divisions that are working, as I know from my research, a lot of schools, which are public institutions, even at private schools, are not, these robust divisions that have this, unlimited staff with unlimited number of hours and resources to go out and again combat this long list of problems we've all sat here and droned off to each other. So if we continue to rely primarily on our institutions' internal resources to respond to these challenges faced by our students, we will continue to experience the outcomes that they have always had, and this in the same belief of always do what you've done, you will always get what you've got. So I do believe it's necessary we change how we respond to it and start to create more partnerships outside of the institution. And I don't mean give the institution away. I mean literal partnerships that benefit the students and that are student centered and student focused, and so that we are communicating the right thing and the right message to our students as well, because students are not blind and they also see the partnerships we create and they are paying attention to what we're teaching them in that aspect as well, because this is innovation asks us to think outside the box. We must think outside the box when it comes to our institutions and the programs and solutions that we create. And so I think that we will be more successful, and I think we will see more success in a lot of our programs and programming and the implementation process a lot smoother if we start to work outside and work in the communities and work with private entities and do that. Okay,
I echo all of that. It's so perfect, because as public health practitioner, we have to think about the fact that the individual and their health behaviors and their well-being doesn't operate in a silo.
Right.
Every one of us is part of social and environmental systems. And in order to create that environment, those social systems to support well-being, we've got to partner with people you would never think of before. The facilities folks are some of my best friends. I let them know about some walkability issues, and they are so fast to repave a crosswalk or cut some vegetation back. Even the city, getting out there and talking to your community, because we've got to tear down this silo of town and gown, because a lot of times our students are part of the community with which our campus exists in, and so they're contributing citizens of that environment and that social system. So how do we make that environment inclusive, that they can be making a contribution to that community and that it also invest back in them as well? So considering, one of my also interesting partners is City of Columbia Development Office. So even looking at the city's bike pedestrian advisory plan, how do we integrate and how do I advocate for what's going to be best for our students as well, because it's also going to impact their greater city too.
I think that's what I call value proposition. I mean, it's what we change how we value what we're giving our students, and instead of rescue them from something and saving them, and we're now giving them and partnering with these these entities, these companies, the community leaders, and bringing value to their institution, bringing value to what they do, and again sending a different message. And so, again, I think that's all part of how we market and how we create a new ideology and a new theory based and institutionalize how we do this whole well-being thing. So, yeah.
One other thing that comes to mind around kind of the value of partnerships is also when we think about whether it's basic needs or more broadly some of the components or dimensions of well-being that we've talked about over the course of these 2 days, is that there is a certain level of one-to-one direct service that is certainly necessary and of value, but it's also, I think, what you were raising around environment and creating context, and that we can't do that work in isolation.
No.
And so when we think about some of the key concerns that our students have, or some of the outcomes that we want them to achieve, or the behaviors we want them to engage in, one office doesn't set the whole environment for that. One office doesn't influence or solely influence and implement policy change to create a context that makes it easier for students to do the things that they need to do. And so I think when we think about facilitating culture change and not just kind of direct service provision, that requires leveraging partnerships. It requires having multiple voices at the table. It requires multiple sets of expertise, whether it's from the city or the academics or the faculty or the students. All of those voices matter to figure out how to create and shape the context so that when we talk about making the healthier choice the easier choice. If there are things that I want you to engage in that I think are beneficial for a particular set of outcomes, then I have to make it really easy as possible for that to be the choice that you can make and engage in. And so we're not able to do that by ourselves. So that's another place where creating that culture change is really, having partnerships to do that is really essential.
Well, see, once we do that, then we can have that hub you're talking about with all the stuff in it. That's so easy.
Right.
So I think we have time for maybe just one more question for the group. And I think you touched on this in the beginning, but I think it's a great place to close here, is if we talk about the role that students play in outreach, and not just as the consumers of these resources, but how do we use our students to help connect to those other resources on campus or connect students who might be in need?
Yeah, I think that they have to be our primary leaders of the charge. A lot of people always ask you, or they, look to say, your programs are, they're lit, they're popping, the students are, there, they always want to be around, and a lot of it's because I empower them to do most of it. I might have, an idea or theory or sit down with them, but you guys should run it. Let's, I like to guide your opinions, but once you get the buy-in from them, and like I said, you bring value to things and you make it worthwhile, I think that that's how students play the biggest role in any programming. I don't care if it's academic, leadership development, health and wellness, doing food pantry. It's really about, one of our biggest programs at the university, which is something I'm not on top of or running, but is Campaign 930, and that has to do with AIDS awareness. Huge. The students are totally into it, become peer mentors. Because they totally run it. And it's something they've grasped to. So when you allow them and guide them and give them the resources and you can empower them, I think that they become their own bestsellers about that. Yeah.
One of the things that really guides our work in the Office of Wellbeing, and I think just as a public health researcher and practitioner, I bring in is the whole concept of what you're describing of doing with versus doing to or for.
Right.
And I think whether it's our programs or our services, there's so much more benefit that we receive and that our communities receive when we're working in partnership, in particular with our students. One of the things that I've really appreciated about my boss is that we do a lot of strategic planning, because one of her things is people are invested in what they help to create. And the same is true for our students. So whether it's helping us think about how we prioritize the work we do, how we structure the work we do, who's delivering the services, supporting them in ways to be the mouthpiece, because whether we give them the right information or not, they are the mouthpiece. Because students, when they're looking for resources, when they're looking for consultation, they're most likely to go to their peers. And so I feel like a part of our responsibility is to support those students, make sure that they're aware of the resources and the services that we have, and that we provide the infrastructure for them to be able to share good information with their peers and to set those norms. They're setting them anyway. part of what we can do is to help support them in establishing that and promoting that within their own community. They live there, they eat there, they work there, they sleep there. You know, we are in and out in a lot of ways. Even within student affairs, we're often there in non-traditional hours, but it's their community. And so we can't, it's very difficult, much more challenging for us to make the decision and from a top-down approach say, these are the things you should do. These are the things that are socially acceptable. They really have to drive that. And so if we're not working in partnership with them, we're not going to make as much progress as we need. And they're not going to be as invested if they didn't help to create and build
And
it.
honestly, I think that's where a lot of the learning comes from, being, of course, that I do over leadership development, and I love experiential learning, and of course I feel it has huge value. Not just running the programs or creating the flyer or, you know, creating a volunteer list or managing the Google Docs. I am, you know, if I'm with you and you're in my program for years, you know, we're building up to something. You should have E&I numbers by the time you get to become a junior or sophomore, because I need your graphic design and you should be making the logo. You should be, I have students who are designing homecoming t-shirts. You should be putting invoices in so that you're getting paid from this government vendor. You know, this is all a building process. And again, then they're telling their friends, oh, well, I have to go work on this because I'm getting paid to go make this logo for the school. Really? So yeah, that's how this whole thing works. And so again, it's not just the word of mouth, but how the word of mouth is then relayed. And so when you see not just an investment, but they see growth in themselves, again, it's the value that we put on not just the program, the value we put on them, and the value we put on the message we send to them. And I have seen, I've seen that work numerous times, over and over and over again, and now it almost just more like a domino effect. You know, because now students just want it. They just want it. Now they're like, how can I go do this? I have students who want to they went from being in cake wars to now 2 of them having E&I numbers, so they have different cake companies. And so anytime you can start turning cake wars into people running cake companies, you know, making cupcakes, this is what it's supposed to turn into. That's what it's supposed to be. And so I think that's how students can play any and every role that's a part of any programming.
So I want to thank our panelists, and I think we're out of time as sort of we wrap up. And I just want to share a story about some students on our campus. I think as we've all been struggling with this, at the end of spring, I found out that many of our students who were struggling with these issues had come together to really talk about how they could support each other. And like many of our campuses, our students, we have free food on many places every day. Somebody's going to host a speaker or have an event. Our students who are food insecure came together as a group, created a group meet, and they let each other know where those free foods are. So you will see never any free food left over because they show up in mass. Some come and eat live, some come and take the leftovers to support each other. And I think they found a way to make this work for them, which I thought was really smart. And I think learning from them about how they did that was brilliant, because I hate to see food go to waste in places like that. So again, I want to thank our panelists for their insights today and for our audience members and those who are live streaming. I hope we provided some insight and some sparks for further discussions as we go forward. We'll be taking a 10-minute break and reconvening at 11 a.m. For the next panel, Building Campus Cross-Functional Partnerships to Address Food Insecurity. Thank you.